Church? Hell no. Are you no longer feeling comfortable in church? This podcast is for individuals who are desperately missing God, but don't know how to find Him. Substance abuse, domestic violence, sex offenses, acrimonious divorce can contribute to discomfort in the church. For these individuals, church is just not an option anymore. Ordained minister Dennis Hall and his guests invite you to listen to this podcast for topics that are inspiring, uplifting, and will bring hope to those who just feel church is not relevant in their lives today.
I'm Dr. Dennis Hall, and I am delighted that you're listening to our podcast today. It sure has been interesting, the kinds of things that happened recently. Just 3 weeks ago, we had an assassination attempt on former President Trump, who was now a candidate for re-election. And then shortly thereafter, the sitting president, Biden, withdraws from the race, and it's announced that the vice president, Kamala Harris, will be running for vice president. And in the midst of all of this, the 2024 Olympics in Paris comes along. I think for a lot of us, it was kind of a relief to have something else to focus our attention on at this time of the year. You know, did you know that it's estimated that more than 4 billion people will watch the Olympics this year? That's 36 times more than watched the last Super Bowl. You know, I've been one of those who've been watching the Olympics every day, even though some of my family are protesting viewing the Olympics this year. And I'll get to that a little later in the podcast. You know, I came across an article on the internet republished from a source called The Conversation. And this article speculates on why we seem to like watching the Olympics so much. You know, interest in sports seems to be common to all populations around the globe. But we really don't stop and wonder, I guess, why the interest. You know, unlike food and sex, there's no obvious survival or reproductive value to sports spectatorship. You know, it seems that even people who usually don't watch sports tune into the Olympic Games. You know, most people agree that it's a lot of fun to watch the Olympics. But what do we get out of the energy and time and money that we invest in watching the Olympics and, for that matter, other sports? You know, humans, like all other mammals, love to play. You know, we engage in activities that prepare us for various things in life. And, you know, when we look at animals, they play differently depending on how they have to act as adults. You know, we see those little kittens bouncing around and pouncing around, and little puppies growling and playing tug of war. You know, they're getting ready for adulthood. You know, for humans, sports often reflect activities that our ancestors found useful, like hunting or competing with others or throwing objects or coordinating a team, you know, like lifting and running and fighting and on and on. You know, this sort of partially explains why we play sports, but it doesn't explain why we watch them. Why do we watch sports? You know, they've done studies of the brain's mirror neuron system that suggest that when we watch others engaging in physical activities, a part of our brain is simulating ourselves doing the same. In other words, part of our brains thinks that it's slam dunking a basketball when we watch someone do it on television, or running a 100-meter sprint, or swimming the 100-meter freestyle. Our minds are actually sort of learning and expanding when we watch people do amazing physical feats, especially sports feats. You know, almost all sports are competitive, and it's part of the reason that we love sports. You know, sports competition is actually meaningful, partly because it demonstrates a status change. One person or team besting another, in our minds, we find this important. When someone is perceived as competing on our behalf, such as when they represent our country in the Olympics, the competition carries a weight of importance, even though we personally aren't the ones winning. We feel like we are because we're projecting onto the athletes wearing our country's flag. It was uplifting to watch the gold medal winner from France being celebrated by throngs of French people since the Olympics were being held right there in Paris. One study, interestingly, found that male sports fans get a surge of testosterone when their team is won. Now, I found that very interesting. We've all experienced various emotions caused by watching others win and lose, and we can't help be moved by the heroic efforts of our athletes competing on the world stage. And we may even get a little teary-eyed. My wife did that last night watching the Olympics. When we see someone from our country lose a race, sometimes by just a few hundredths of a second. Some studies suggest that we're interested in the resolution of uncertainty. It's why we're much more likely to watch a TV show that came out last year than watch a sports contest that occurred last year. You see, watching sports in real time feels more important because the outcome is still uncertain. People enjoy close games more than one opponent just demolishing the other, even if the winner represents our own country. Olympic sports can also be beautiful, from synchronized diving to gymnastics and breakdancing. It gives us a sense of the performing arts. These sports require panels of judges because there's no objective measure of the performance. Now, I will confess that I seem to like sports that do have an objective measure of performance. When the men and women are in the starting blocks for the 100-meter dash, the outcome will be determined by who gets to the finish line first. The Olympics are just a veritable buffet of sports delight, catering to our sense of loyalty, our drive to learn and to resolve uncertainty, and to see beauty in the physical prowess of these athletes. The Olympics aim to bring people of all nations together to celebrate great feats of athletic achievement. This is what creates an undeniable connection that ties viewers together across the globe. It's interesting that the Olympic Games began in Greece about 3,000 years ago. According to historical manuscripts, the first ancient Olympic Games were celebrated in 776 BC. 776 BC in Olympia in Greece. The Olympics were held from that time, at the full moon after the summer solstice, which is around the middle of July, in honor of their god Zeus. The tradition of an Olympic truce was established in ancient Greece in the 9th century when a treaty was signed by the participating regions that provided that the athletes and the artists and their families, as well as the ordinary pilgrims, were able to travel in complete safety to participate and attend the ancient Olympic Games before returning to their respective countries. Messengers went city to city to announce the date of the competitions, and they demanded a halt to any fighting during and after the games. Originally, there were 3 main criteria for participating in the ancient Olympic Games. Athletes had to be male. Athletes had to be male, of Greek origin and freeborn. Women were not permitted to participate in or watch the events, although they allowed young girls in the crowd. Now, one of the things that's fun to read in history is there was a famous breach of this rule when a woman who had trained her son and he won his race. And apparently she had dressed as a man to sneak into the crowd and sub, celebrate a little bit too exuberantly. Apparently her clothes loosened and revealed she was a woman. And she escaped the usual punishment, which was the death penalty, only because she came from a family of great Olympic victors. But from then on, all trainers and athletes had to be naked to avoid such occurrences. Now, that would sort of triple the viewership of the Olympics today, wouldn't it? Slaves and foreigners, they were all excluded from participating in the games. And then after the conquest of Greece by Rome in 146 BC, the Romans were able to join the Greek athletes. The site of Olympia must have been a positively buzzing area during the games, with mass crowds of excited spectators staying in makeshift campsites and admiring the masses of fine statues and buildings in the Olympia area. Food vendors, craftsmen, musicians, poets, and philosophers took full advantage of the crowds to publicize their wares and ideas. Now, historians do not know exactly how many spectators attended the games, but we do know that around 45,000 spectators watched the main events in the stadium. The ancient Olympic events consisted of running 3 races: a speed race that was the length of the stadium, a second race that was 2 lengths of the stadium, and a third race that was 20 lengths of the stadium. Another major event was wrestling, which only ended when one of the contestants admitted defeat. Another event was boxing, where the hands of the competitors were protected by long strips of leather, and pieces of metal were sometimes added to the hand joints to make the punches more violent. And one of the toughest events was a martial arts event that combined wrestling and boxing, and was considered the toughest of all the events. The ancient Olympic Games, even had the pentathlon consisting of 5 events, the running, long jump, discus, javelin, and wrestling. Now, the ancient Olympic Games only had one winner, only one. And his reward was a palm leaf placed in his hands while the spectators applauded him and threw flowers, and a ribbon of red wool was placed around his head as a sign of victory. At the closing ceremony, a crown of olive branches was placed on his head, and when he returned to his hometown, he was treated as a hero and given all kinds of advantages for the rest of his life. And usually, to show that he had become famous, a statue was erected in honor of him. After the conquest of Greece by Rome in 146 BC, a decline began, which ended with the games eventually being abolished. In 393 AD, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I, who had converted to Christianity, decided to abolish all pagan cults, and this resulted in the Olympic Games being abolished for more than 1,000 years. After more than 1,000 years of their existence. The ancient Olympic Games had taken place in Greece every 4 years until Emperor Theodosius abolished them. It'd be 1,500 years before the Olympic Games would be revived. It was in 1892 that a French aristocrat proposed the idea of officially reviving the games and playing them every 4 years. He co-founded the International Olympic Committee, which became the authority responsible for organizing what we know as the modern Olympics. And by 1896, the world once again enjoyed the athletic festival that had captivated Greek audiences over a millennium before. The modern Olympic Games were instilled with the original values of the ancient Olympics. Competitive sport played out with a sense of goodwill and honor amongst all nations. The original Olympic truce declared by the ancient Greeks to ensure safety for all games was also resurrected for the modern Olympics. This powerful idea that sport can promote peace and reconciliation continues to be at the heart of the games today. In 1896, when they were revived, 200 male athletes from 14 nations competed in 43 events, and 60,000 spectators came to watch. Some events had roots dating back to the ancient Olympics, such as running and wrestling and discus throwing, while others were brand new, like swimming and weightlifting and tennis. In 1896, also featured the first marathon to take place at the Olympics. We've become accustomed to seeing the winner of an Olympic event receive a gold medal. But these medals were not introduced until the 1904 Games in St. Louis. By the 1900 Games, shortly after the revival of the modern Olympics, women were allowed to compete. And those 5 interlaced rings, the Olympic rings, they represent the 5 parts of the world. The 6 colors in the rings represent the colors found on all the flags of the nation. And the Olympic Games have been held every 4 years, with the exception that they were canceled due to world wars in 1916 and 1940 and 1944. And this year, 10,500 athletes representing 206 countries are competing in Paris. Real sports heroes and legends have emerged from Olympic Games. American swimmer Michael Phelps, who competed between 2004 and 2016, has the most Olympic medals with a total of 28. 23 were gold medals. The fastest man to ever live is a Jamaican, Usain Bolt, who competed between 2008 and 2016. Bolt not only has 8 Olympic gold medals, but also is the world record holder in the 100 and 200 meter sprints, as well as a 400 relay. I have to say, though, the Paris Olympics delivered 2 great disappointments to me. The first disappointment has to do with the Olympic flame. Since 1936, torch has been lit by a flame in Greece, where the Olympics began. And then that torch is carried across the oceans and countries, sometimes around the world, sometimes by former Olympians, and sometimes by noteworthy dignitaries. In dramatic fashion, it's used to light a fiery cauldron to begin the Olympic Games. This year, the torch from Greece was carried from town to town until it finally reached Paris, representing the spirit of the Olympics. Now, torches with real flames were carried to the Olympic cauldron, but all that really happened was someone flipped the switch and turned on the lights. The Olympic cauldron is fueled by electricity. The base ring features 40 LED lights that illuminate a cloud of water vapor created by 200 high-pressure misty nozzles, representing the appearance of a flood of lights and the appearance of fire. Now, this is the first time that the Olympic flame has been entirely electric. It was a spectacle to watch, but I, like many, are afraid that this high-tech marvel risks overshadowing the traditional symbolism of a real burning flame. My biggest disappointment, however, was the willingness of the French Olympic Committee to allow a group of drag queens to mock the Last Supper of Jesus Christ. The Last Supper is one of the cornerstones of the Christian faith. And there has been worldwide outrage over the evilness of this presentation in the opening ceremonies. Many Christians around the world and some in my family have boycotted watching the Olympics because of this unforgivable attack on Christianity. And yes, the French Olympic Committee did offer a tepid apology and stated that they achieved their goal of inclusiveness. Well, I and many Christians around the world are offended and disappointed. But I'm still watching the Olympics because it showcases athletes from around the world who symbolize international cooperation, cultural exchange, and the pursuit of excellence. The modern Olympics inspire millions, demonstrating how hard work and dedication can lead to extraordinary achievements. By bringing diverse nations together, the Olympics has the potential to promote peace and understanding, and by reflecting the core values of the ancient Olympic Games. The Greek culture dominated the Roman world during the time of Jesus and the early church. As a Roman citizen, the Apostle Paul was educated in Greek philosophy and society, and despite the fact that he was a deeply religious Jew. And this allowed him to express the gospel to all people. For Christians, the Olympics reflect the heavenly idea that all people and nations can live as one. Athletic games have a practical and spiritual application for following Jesus. Internet writer Britt Mooney outlines some lessons that can be learned from the Olympic Games. Olympians train rigorously for years. Some begin training in elementary school, maintaining an unwavering focus on their ultimate goal, winning a medal in the Olympic Games. And likewise, God calls us to fix our eyes on Jesus and the eternal reward awaiting us. Hebrews 12:1-2 tells us, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. The author of Hebrews is telling us that just as an Olympian runs a race with perseverance, we need to run our spiritual race with focus and perseverance, as Jesus did for his own destiny to sit at the right hand of God after the cross. Keeping our eyes on the prize means prioritizing our relationship with Jesus above everything. Like athletes who visualize their victory, Christians should constantly remind themselves of the eternal life offered through Christ. Athletes push through pain and fatigue for a temporary goal. And we can find encouragement in the promise of eternal life, knowing that our current struggles are temporary compared to the coming glory. Athletes who compete at the highest level do so by eliminating distractions and dedicating themselves entirely to their training and to their goals. In a similar way, Christians are called to live with a singular focus on their faith and relationship with God. Paul writes about this in 1 Corinthians 9:24 through 27, when he says, "Do you not know that in a race all runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the game goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone running aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize." In other words, discipline, focus, and self-control is required in our Christian walk. It means removing distractions and setting aside anything that hinders spiritual growth and commitment to God. This could involve managing our time more effectively, or prioritizing spiritual activities, and avoiding temptations that can lead us into sin. Just as athletes forego certain pleasures to achieve peak performance, we must be willing to sacrifice for our faith. In Galatians 5:22 and 23, Paul lists self-control as a gift of the Spirit, which means we require the power of God to be disciplined for the goal. In 2 Timothy 1:7, Paul further explains, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." The Spirit. Every Olympic athlete will tell you that regular discipline is not fun at the moment. I heard one of the Olympic swimmers explaining how his father would be at the pool to urge him to continue training when he wanted to quit. Physical training tests the body and the mind, going beyond previous limits, breaking us down and making us grow stronger. Olympic athletes, they go through this to give them the opportunity for a medal. God's discipline does something in a similar way. We see this spelled out in Hebrews 12:11. "No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained." Training for the Olympics is extremely difficult. Many of the athletes report on how they wanted to quit along the way and where their encouragement came from. This kind of relentless enduring of hardships in training, it mirrors the spiritual endurance that Christ calls us to. The Bible clearly teaches how we will have obstacles and trials in our faith journey. James 1:2 reminds us, "Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial. Having stood the test, that person will receive the crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him." And if we do give up for a time, we can't allow temporary failure to stand in the way of eternal destiny. There were several of these Olympians in the games today that talked about the difficulties they've had in recent years to get back into training. And we can rest in God's grace and forgiveness and rededicate ourselves to the process of discipline and obeying the Spirit. God understands our weaknesses, and willingly restores us. You know, this kind of endurance means trusting God's timing and his plan. Even when the progress seems low or setbacks occur. You know, Olympic athletes rely on experienced coaches to guide, train, and motivate them toward achieving their goals. You know, and in a similar way, believers can benefit immensely from other seasoned believers who can provide guidance in our faith journey. You know, the head coach is Jesus. The head coach is Jesus, who endured extreme temptation and victory over sin and death. And we can find mentors in our church community. You know, Proverbs 27:17 reflects this when it says, as iron sharpens iron, so one person sharpens another. You know, for Christians, seeking mentorship means humbly recognizing the need for guidance and being open to learning from those who are more mature in their spiritual journey. Olympic athletes dedicate themselves to the highest standards in their sport, committing to relentless practice and discipline and perseverance. An old adage among coaches is, you play like you practice. You play like you practice. That means that athletes must strive for excellence in every moment of their practice time. Colossians 3:23 and 24 captures this perspective for our spiritual lives when it tells us, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord you are serving. Olympic athletes endure intense training and frequently have to overcome significant challenges and setbacks. However, they will tell you that they are able to find joy in their progress in their journey toward their goals. Similarly, the scripture encourages us to embrace joy through our spiritual walk. James 1:2-3 tells it this way: consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. No one likes hardship. You know, we would avoid it if we could. However, God tells us that these trials become opportunities to practice perseverance and to gain the outcome that we expect. You know, as I begin to wind this podcast down and conclude, I want to remind the listeners that whether you are a young teenager or one of our seniors, your life here on earth will someday end. The Olympic athletes are leaving a legacy simply by participating. And those who have achieved excellence in the Olympic Games by winning gold medals will be remembered as long as the Olympic Games are conducted. When the Apostle Paul was approaching the end of his life and anticipating his martyrdom in Rome, he wrote to his young protege. He said, the time for my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but to all who have longed for his appearing. You can read this in 2 Timothy 4:6-8. Now, if you're listening to this podcast today, God is calling you to fight the good fight, to finish the race, and to keep the faith. May God bless you, and thank you for listening to this podcast.